Hi, I'm Dr. David Dobson. Welcome to Conversations. We have all been there. We take a job because of a promise, not just
Yeah.
what's written in the contract, but those unwritten expectations. The belief that if you work hard, your manager will have your back, you will be treated fairly, and your well being will be actually matter.
Yes.
But what happens when that unspoken trust is broken? How does someone even begin to recover from the emotional toil of a workplace betrayal? Joining me today to unpack this is Dr. Michael Jansare. Michael is a lecturer in management at Kent Business School at the University of Kent in the UK and holds a PhD in management from Edith Cowan University in Australia. Michael's latest research takes a look at psychological contract violations, the regret employees feel when trust is broken, and how to deal with it through emotional forgiveness. Michael, it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dobson. It's a pleasure to be on your show to contribute my research with your audience. I hope by the end of our conversation, our audience would receive enormous benefit from listening to or watching this podcast.
Michael, you have lived and studied and taught across several continents, including highly individualistic Western context like Australia and Europe, as well as deeply communal collectivistic cultures like Ghana. Seeing both sides of that coin, how have these diverse cultures shaped your personal view of what makes a healthy workplace?
Well, thank you very much, Dave. I think this question holds a significant role for me as part of my research also focuses on the human side of sustainability. And so, yeah, in my perspective, a healthy work environment is a productivity gain for organizations. In other words, a happier worker is a productive worker. And so, as management, our responsibility is to ensure that we help employees to feel that psychological sense of both energy and then vitality as well as authenticity in the workplace. Now, for instance, I've had the opportunity of juggling through different continents or different countries. So in Africa, the culture there is more of relational than transactional. In other words, the workplace culture in Africa reinforces the sense of belongingness, the sense of mutual support and mentoring, right? But then you see, when you go to Australia, Australia is a little bit different. In Australia, there is a genuine informality. So the concept of mateship, for example, is popular in Australia. In Australia, you see your colleague, you can walk into the office of your colleague and say, "Hi, mate," and go, right? So that kind of genuine informality in Australia fosters a sense of psychological safety. And so, one thing that I learned from Australia, or one thing that Australia taught me, is the fact that productivity is the flow from your sense of energy or vitality and your authenticity. It's not about presenteeism. But that is not the same when it comes to Europe or maybe specifically the UK where I am now. In the UK, I must say that the culture here has deepened my appreciation for what I refer to as autonomy.
Mhm.
Right. So here you have to sustain yourself and survive on your own. So colleagues here perform their work with high sense of autonomy. In other words, mastery over the task. So rather than collaboration, right? So here there's a great deal for respect for boundaries. For instance, in Australia, if you go into maybe the coffee center and then a colleague's office is open, you can just pop in and say hi, mate, right? But
Mhm.
here in the UK, you cannot just walk into a colleague's office when you don't have that informal relationship with the person. That would be a distraction. There's a great deal of boundary, respect for boundary here. And so collectively, I can say that all these cultures have made me more flexible, has strengthened my global mindset as a worker, and then also has helped me to be more adaptable And because of the experiences that I've gathered from these various aspects of the world, I can for a fact say that look, I'm very flexible and adaptable regardless of the context where you put me. Because in my opinion, the idea that employees should bring their complete self to the workplace is
Mm,
contingent upon the perception that they hold with respect to how healthy the workplace is. And so if an employee is going to perceive the workplace as a healthy workplace, that person must be flexible, must be willing to adapt, right? And must
mm.
be tolerant to some nuances that may be totally different from what he or she has experienced in other contexts. That's what I believe that a healthy workplace is all about as far as my perception and experience from these different areas is concerned.
I love those culture nuances you mentioned, even within this individualistic Western context. Yeah,
Yeah,
like Australia and now your experience in UK, even there's so much subtle differences.
yeah,
Your recent paper focuses on the psychological contract violations.
yeah.
Can you explain what a psychological contract is and what a violation looks like in everyday work life, Michael?
Right. Thank you very much. I think to explain the concept of psychological contract, we have to go to the root. In other words, I mean, where did the concept originate from? And at what point was the concept developed? Right. So in 1958, I mean, a psychiatrist with the name Carl Menninger is the one who popularized the idea of psychological contract after observing some kind of informal, unwritten reciprocity between therapists and their patient
Mm,
during clinical trials. Now, this idea was then adapted into the organizational behavior literature by a gentleman with the name Chris Agres in 1960. So Chris, in his book Understanding Organizational Behavior, then gave flesh to the idea of what unwritten contract is all about, a mutually exclusive exchange relationship that must exist between two parties. But then Chris Focus moved from a therapist and patient to now an employee and a supervisor. Then in 1970, Harry Levinson then decided to elaborate on the concept of mutual expectation. And
mm,
then his colleague, also in 1988, with the name Edgar Shen, also gave more light to this idea. Then a year after came Denis Rousseau, who then decided to set the tone as far as empirical research in this area is concerned. So this idea has trickled down from this expert, and now it has gotten to my turn where I'm adding my quota or my contribution to what psychological contract is all about. So this is basically the origin or the genesis of the idea of psychological contract. But see, psychological contract basically has to do with a reciprocal exchange that
mm,
is based on a promise between employers and employees.
mm,
But this reciprocal exchange is not written like the formal employment contract, it's unwritten.
mm,
However, it is promissory based. In
mm,
other words, the employer is saying that I'm going to give you my effort, I'm
mm,
going to give you my energy, I'm going to bring my creativity to bear.
mm,
You, the employer, what are you going to give in exchange? So if I give my creativity and it increases the bottom line of your organization,
mm,
automatically you have to increase my pay. So there's the
mm.
need for pay rise. And
Yeah.
then also, if I give you my energy, my time, I
Mm,
expect that you should protect me, job security. I
mm,
expect that when there is promotion, you should
mm,
also promote me. Because if you don't do that, then it creates a sort of imbalance between the effort that I'm giving and then the reward I'm receiving from you as an employer. And
mm,
so there is always a violation
mm,
when employees emotionally react to the imbalance that is created as a result of the fact that one party has failed to fulfill its part of this promissory based, I mean,
mm,
contract. And so
mm.
violation basically has to do with the emotional reaction. It could be in the form of anger, it could be
Yeah.
in the form of resentment or shock or outrage towards the employer
Mm,
when the employee perceive that the employer has deliberately
mm.
broken that promise between
Yeah.
them. Yeah,
Michael, your paper points out that the past management research only looked at how these broken promises affect company metrics like employees quitting or slowing down their work.
Yeah.
Why do you think researchers previously overlooked the direct impact of an employee's personal well-being?
Well, thank you very much. Is it the idea of psychological contract stems from the concept of transaction. So there's that kind of
Mm,
transactional, element in here
mm,
that you give me this
mm,
and then I reciprocate in that order. And
mm,
so the theoretical anchor of psychological contract has always been the social exchange theory with the norm of reciprocity. That if employees realize that management cares about them, then
mm,
they are willing to go the extra mile. And so
mm,
that is the reason why the foremost thinking of psychological contract has always been to understand the impact that it has on the attitude and behavior of employees. Now, this predominant view has overlooked the well being effect or outcome of psychological contract. And that is the reason why our study seeks to address this seemingly overlooked aspect of the conversation within the psychological contract literature. Yeah.
mm. Michael, your research found that contract violations lead to a deep sense of experience regret, which
Yes.
you describe as a backward-looking, discrete emotion.
Yeah.
What exactly are employees regretting in these situations?
Thank you very much. Yeah, so you know, I had a conversation with an employee, right, which of course sparked this whole research idea. So it was a casual kind of conversation. Now,
Mm,
I was part of my research program conducting in the hospitality and tourism sector. I bump into this frontline hotel staff, and then he begins to tell me that, look, before I would pick up this job, I had other alternatives, but then I was assured that I will not work overtime.
mm,
But just a month into the job, I'm being told a different thing. And so I asked him, so what are you going to do? He said, well, I feel betrayed by my employer because what they told me from the beginning is not exactly what is happening now. And so I then probe further, what then are you going to do? And he said, well, I will not look back with regret
mm,
because I've forgiven them. And so
mm,
that, of course, is what sparked this idea. So this kind of scenario or this conversation gives me a sense that, okay, so the regret happened
mm,
after the breach, right, occurred. In other words, the reason why the employee is saying that he feels betrayed is because what he
mm,
was told, in
mm,
other words, the relationship, the promise based
mm,
relationship has been
mm,
broken. And that
mm,
is why he's feeling this kind of emotion. And so I began to dig deep into the literature to find out why regret is an important negative emotion, yet seems to have been overlooked in the psychological contract literature. One thing was the fact that previous research have, as a matter of fact, considered negative emotions as a composite, right? So their inability to disaggregate this negative emotion into a backward and forward looking emotion component is the reason why, though regret is an intense negative emotion, yet has not been studied within the psychological contract literature. So,
mm,
by unpacking negative emotions into it backward and then forward domains, we were able to situate regret as the immediate effect or outcome of a violation of the psychological contract.
mm,
And of course, as human beings, at any given time, we may feel one form of regret. For example, if you look at the healthcare sector, right,
mm,
the recognition program that they have always favors the physicians and then disfavors the nurses. Is the reason why in Africa there is that kind of brain drain. Most of these nurses are moving to Europe and other places in search for greener pastures. Why? Because the recognition program does not cater for them. It only caters for the physicians. Equally
mm,
important is the fact that, this whole idea of return to office after we were told that, look, there is remote work policy in place. It's also creating some kind of, reaction from employees. Employees feel that, look, there is a policy, and then we have been given that leeway. Why now management are forcing us to come back? That means there's
mm,
some kind of violation as far as this, promissory based exchange is concerned. So all of these
mm,
are classic examples of why violation can result in regret. So regret is, you had the opportunity to have made a different decision. Now, you made this very decision, and then now you are asking yourself, would my present situation have changed if I had made an alternative decision?
Mm.
That is
Yeah.
the most important explanation here. So yes, you had alternatives, but you chose this particular job, and then what you were told before you made that decision is not exactly what is being executed, and so you feel that, look, I've been betrayed. That is the component of regret. So regret becomes more intense when your employer deliberately decide to break the promise-based obligation.
Mm.
Yeah,
Wow, that's really a powerful point because it shows it's not just about the job, it's
no,
about loss of personal trust and
exactly.
respect for
Yeah,
employee for what they do. I mean, the example you mentioned about the nurses, moving. So it's not the job, but the recognition of the work and respect and the
yeah,
trust. Uh,
yeah.
and to combat this negative emotional toll, you introduce the concept of emotional forgiveness.
Yes.
How can an employee genuinely forgive an organization that has treated them unfairly?
Thank you very much. I mean, this is an interesting aspect of our research, and maybe let me say the most significant contribution as far as our study is concerned. You see, genuinely forgiving an organization or an employer who have deliberately treated you bad, right, or unfairly, is primarily for your advantage as an employee. The reason is that, you see, when you are bottled up with this kind of resentment and anger, it poisons you, the employee. And so, one of the best ways by which you can release yourself from this emotional grip of resentment, anger, and then bitterness is that you have to let go so that it doesn't continue to drain your energy and then block future opportunities. That
Mm,
is the main reason why I believe that forgiveness is imperative. Forgiveness is a curative medicine, right? It is therapeutic because it
mm,
is going to help you
mm,
to have your peace
mm,
and live in a tranquility.
mm,
And therefore, forgiveness here, from my perspective, simply means an employee deciding to choose peace over resentment or
mm,
the desire to hold personal retaliation with your employer.
mm,
But that doesn't mean that you should let your employer continue to abuse you. No, if you
mm,
think that this is a deliberate attempt and it keeps going, then the
mm,
best way is to exit that particular workplace.
mm,
But the reason why we're saying that enacting forgiveness could be one of the best, coping strategy is because now the violation has occurred, right? It may be as a result of a systemic failure
mm,
or a deliberate attempt by the employer. You, as an employee, must save your well being, i.e., acknowledge that the harm has already been caused. The promise has already been broken. So
mm,
perhaps the best way is document what happened and then
mm,
talk to a trusted colleague at the workplace or maybe a therapist if the need arises. And then once you have done that, make that intentional decision that you are going to weigh the cost of holding these grudges or bitterness or resentment against the freedom of releasing yourself thereof. Because if you hold this resentment, right, it will short circuit the flow of your energy. And remember, we did emphasize earlier on that the energy and then the authenticity that flows from you is what determines your productivity.
yeah.
And then finally, replace the negative emotion, the anger, resentment, with positive emotion,
Mm,
empathy, and compassion. That is a way of helping yourself and then
mm,
sustaining your well being.
yeah. How powerful that forgiveness is.
Yeah.
I love that analogy because it illustrates that forgiveness is the employee's peace of mind, not
Yes.
just the company's.
Yeah.
Michael, you actually tested these ideas across two completely different workplaces, the frontline
Yes.
hotel staff in the United
Hmm.
States, a highly individualistic Western culture, and
Yeah.
staff in Ghana, which is deeply collectivistic.
Hmm.
Why did you choose the hospitality sector for this cross-cultural comparison?
Right. Thank you very much. Well, overall, I mean, available statistics clearly shows that, let's say, 40% of employees experience some kind of stress,
Mm,
right? And
mm,
in 2008, maybe I should begin in 2008, both the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and International Labour Organization recognized stress as a psychosocial workplace hazard. And stress result from high job demands, or it may be a systemic thing, so an organizational factor, or maybe an economic or financial factor. So available statistics in 2025, for example, from the State of the Global Work report by Gallup, indicate that the daily stress level is 40%. In other words, 40% of employees experience stress every day. And if you look at the WHO Mental Health at Work report also, it tells us that 15% of the working adult are suffering from mental related burdens as a result of stress.
mm,
And so clearly, this gives us a sense that stress is, a very significant burden that needs to be addressed. And we are looking at, so what are the triggers of stress? We realize that violation is one of the triggers of stress. And in the hospitality sector, as
mm,
you and I would attest to,
mm,
frontline employees have to juggle through multiple
mm,
tasks at the same time. My observation when I was at the 8th Avenue downtown Calgary, I made my personal observation of a frontline staff attending to new customers and then at the same time on the phone addressing a concern and then on the computer doing something.
mm,
Here comes an already existing customer with a complaint. He defiles the queue there and bump in and then want his concern to be addressed immediately, right? So such a disgruntled customer comes in with his emotions and pour it on this frontline, innocent frontline, worker. What then happened? It means that by the end of the day, you take on all of these emotions. And this is the reason why I believe that even forgiveness is more potent, because if you cannot, then obviously you are going to feel more regret when there is any broken promise between you and then your employer. We were so much interested in these different contexts because we wanted to find out how employees from a collectivist standpoint and an individualist standpoint may react to violation. And we observed that there are similarities. In other words, psychological contract is a universal concept. It is not necessarily context specific. However, when we delve deep into our data, we observe some nuances that rather there is a difference between how full-time employees react to psychological contract violation and how part-time employees
mm.
react to psychological contract violation. Yeah,
So, Michael, taking everything you discovered from the US and Ghana,
yeah.
what is so what for leadership? What do managers
Look,
need to do differently to protect their employees' psychological contract, the unwritten agreement with their staff?
thank you very much. Yeah, so here's the point. Number one is the fact that we expect practitioners like HR professionals within the hospitality and tourism sector to implement good people management practices. We believe that number one, training, promotion, and performance management are key when it comes to helping employees to understand the promise based reciprocal exchange. Specifically, we advise that HR practitioners should train their frontline employees so that they can embrace such eventualities should any negative thing happen. So once they are trained to embrace eventualities, that will help them to cope better with unpleasant emotions and then also help to prevent what we refer to in our research as chronic disappointment and exhaustion, which of course is as a result of what expectation adjustment. And so once they are trained that look, this is the context of the work, there are eventualities, and so you have to embrace yourself when they happen. You need to be able to cope with such unpleasant. So you make them aware afore, beforehand. And then when it happens, they will not be shocked. And so the idea of being shocked, in outrage and then resentment and anger, all of this will be catered for when they have already been pre-informed or they've been trained. So they've been toughened up as far as their muscle is concerned. So their emotional muscle will be able to absorb this kind of negative emotions. And number two, we also believe that, look, if practitioners would communicate specifically the details of the organization's psychological contract to their frontline workers, especially during staff meetings or professional development workshops, or maybe employee week celebrations, or maybe
Mm.
dinner event.
Yeah.
This will do a great work in helping to prevent feelings of regret, because right now they know specifically this is what the organization says they can do, right? When you have done that. And
Mm.
so that becomes easier. But when they are not aware, that is when the outrage or the intense anger would,
Mm.
as a matter of fact, trigger their regret. But when they have been made aware through such forums, automatically they know specifically what is at stake. A classic example, for example, you are told that if you write a paper, you submit to a conference, it's accepted, then automatically you'll be sponsored to attend that conference. Now you do exactly that. And then when it comes to the sponsorship, your organization tells you we have a tight budget and therefore we can't sponsor you. That is violation of psychological contract.
Yeah.
But if you let the employee, right, be aware.
Mm.
Also,
Mm.
look, if there is a tight budget, this is likely to be the result from our end. Then the
Mm.
employee will embrace him or herself with
Yeah.
such eventualities that, look, it is either I am sponsored or I'm not sponsored. But
Mm.
when they have been told that you get a paper accepted, automatically we sponsor you, and then it happened that they do their part of the bidding and then you refuse to do your part of the bidding on the basis that you don't
Mm.
have the might,
Mm.
automatically you have not been fair to such employee as far as this unwritten
Yeah.
promise-based reciprocal exchange relationship is concerned.
Yeah.
And finally, also important is the fact that we expect management, as far as this hotel, industry is concerned, to implement good intervention programs such as mindfulness training, right? Train them so that at least if these things happen, they will not be affected that much. The impact will not be too much. And also train them, give them what we call empathy training, so they can be able to increase their tolerance for negative emotions, including
Mm.
experience regret.
Yeah.
This, we believe,
Yeah.
is the so what as far as our research is concerned. Yeah,
Michael, when you look back at how this study came together,
yeah.
what do you think makes it stand out the most in the broader debate on how we manage people?
Right. Thank you very much. So, yeah, the uniqueness of this research stems from the fact that, look, we go beyond just negative emotions to try to understand the nuances as far as negative emotions is concerned. Because prior research has always been looking at how psychological contract, right, triggers negative emotion. But then we say that, look, it's about time that we unpack this box called negative emotions to find out the different component or the different domains, and in doing so we open up, a trajectory or a path for future research to explore more of the backward looking aspect of negative emotions, right? Of course, we did observe that predominant of the literature as far as negative emotions is concerned has focused on the forward looking aspect in terms of anticipatory regret, anticipatory anxiety, in terms of anticipatory regret, in terms of fear and worry. But then when it comes to the backward looking emotion, few research has considered specifically the domain. And so we believe that our research contributes significantly to helping us create sort of a balance between our understanding of the effect of psychological contract violation on the immediate emotions that employees suffer when such broken promise occurs. And then also, we bring in the argument that it's not just enough to forgive, but
Mm.
forgiveness that helps you to replace the negative emotions in place with a positive emotion is what matters. Because if you do not, as a matter of fact, replace that resentment, that bitterness, right, with empathy, you will still, you may think that, oh, I have forgiven, but yet you still be living in that shadow, of that negative emotion. And so we believe that the ability of the employee to replace that kind of negative emotion with oriented positive emotion is what will stop their energy from being drained by the reaction from this negative workplace stressor, right? So that they can be more positive towards the future.
Mm. Yeah, Michael, these are some great conversation which need to
Yeah,
be continued. Yeah,
yeah.
Michael, looking ahead, what is next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
Right. Thank you very much. So, I think the current research which excites me the most is this time around move to entrepreneurship. So, we're looking at entrepreneur phronesis. Now, phronesis is a concept that sits well with me because phronesis from the Aristotelian philosophical tradition basically has to do with one's practical wisdom. Phronesis is context specific because if there is a situation, you have to enact your practical wisdom to solve that kind of problem or that situation. And so we introduce the concept of phronesis into the mainstream entrepreneurship literature by arguing that when entrepreneurs are facing resource constraint, which is a challenge, one of the ways by which they can navigate this kind of challenge and then continue with their venture creation activity is when they can enact their practical wisdom. We then argue that it is not just enough to enact your practical wisdom, but you must have belief. That is self efficacy, implicit belief in your ability also to mobilize resources in such resource challenging environment. And so this together is the reason why we believe that introducing phronesis into the mainstream entrepreneurship literature provides an avenue for us to contribute to the cognitive perspective in entrepreneurship and then open up another window for
Mm,
research in that area. So those who are interested in context specific cognition will be able to follow suit with our research. Then also the next research, which of course is more interesting to me, is an idea that I've been carrying all this while. So I believe that your imaginative power is your creative ability. And
mm,
so I want to find out
mm,
how entrepreneurs can leverage their imagination to create products and services that will enhance the innovation performance of their businesses. So that's the
Understood.
current work that we're looking at.
Michael, this has been an insightful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your interesting research with us today. Wish you all the very best with your upcoming projects.
Thank you very much, David. It's a pleasure to contribute to your podcast, and I hope that your audience will enjoy our conversation. Thank you.